Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. The topic we're going to be discussing today is Windows 10 and how we can help you get to there fast, really using Citrix technologies. My name's Wade Fisser. I'm a sales engineer based in New South Wales, and I've got my colleague with me.
Yeah, my name's Aaron Robinson. I'm a Territory SE based out of Melbourne. Hopefully we've got a good session today for you guys. We're going to look to do something a little bit different as well for today's session. So what we're going to do is look to do a bit of a role play. I'm going to play the customer, and Wade's going to be the guy educating me on how to get to Windows 10 fast. So I'll be asking a bunch of, hopefully not too silly questions, but questions to get me to Windows 10. So what I'll do is I'm going to introduce him to my corporation, so an introduction to Acme Corp. Then I'm going to talk to him about some of my Windows 10 migration concerns. We're going to discuss if my applications are compatible and how can I make that a fast process. Then how am I going to deliver those apps? So what methodologies should I use to get those across to my Windows 10 platform? And then we're also going to have a chat about web apps because, as you know, SaaS is becoming quite a big topic in the industry today. And then the big question that we're going to answer is how do I stay on Windows 10? So we all know about Windows 10 as a service. Once we get to Windows 10, how do we stay there and how do we keep up to date? So an introduction to my corporation, Acme Corp. So I've got a range of different customers that come to me for different solutions. So I've got Daffy Duck and Wile E. Coyote. So they come to me for quite a dispersed range of products. So our number one seller is Acme Dynamite. We also have a few tornado guns that get sold. And one of our most popular ones, you can't go past, the Rocket Unicycle. But we have a problem at Acme Corp, and the big problem with Acme Corp is product quality. We have a lot of things go wrong. Poor Daffy gets blown up all the time, and Wiley can never seem to get the results that he wants. So we're going to work really hard within Acme Corp to focus on product quality assurance. So that's one of the things we're going to focus on, and sort of reducing business costs as well. So that's some of the things we're aiming to achieve here at Acme. And one of the things we think are going to help with that is if we get across to Windows 10. But we want to do that in a fast manner. And so to give you an idea of the project scope that we're going to be discussing today, I've got about 3,000 users in my environment. They're currently running on Windows 7, a combination of desktops and laptops. I've got 500 applications within my business. 400 of those are your traditional 16, 32, 64-bit apps. And I've got about 100 web apps that I run as well. So quite a large application portfolio that I have to manage. And then I've also got currently a small Citrix 6.5 farm delivering applications out for me. And I want to look to see how I can get some better utilization out of that. So some of my Windows 10 concerns that I want to discuss with Wade today is how. So how am I going to get across to Windows 10? And what does that process involve? Are my applications compatible? What are some of the pitfalls that I need to look out for? Once I know that my apps are compatible and I can get them across to Windows 10, how am I going to deliver those apps? So what methodology do I do it? What's the best way that I get them out to my users? And then, of course, I want him to cover off those SaaS and web-based apps for me because they're a tricky bunch to manage and I've got them running all over the place. And then lastly, I've got a testing manager who keeps telling me, now that I'm on Windows 10, I need more testers to help me keep up with Windows 10 and this Windows 10 as a service. What is that Windows 10 as a service and how can you help me with this problem that I have to stay there because I don't want to spend any more money than I already have to. So the first question that I have really is, are my apps compatible?
Great, thanks Aaron, thanks for the introduction. And I think there's a lot of things that we can definitely help you with. Hopefully everything in the deck covers off the requirements. I'm sure we'll get to them at some point. But as you're right, the first thing that most organizations consider is really, are my applications compatible? And we've all been through these projects, Windows 2000 XP, XP to 7, 7 to maybe 8, or now you're going from 7 straight to Windows 10 like Acme Corp is. And in each one of those steps, we've got the same question. Are my apps going to work? And I have this conversation with every single customer every time there's an upgrade. What can I do to stop myself from having to do the same thing I did last time because that was painful? And what we're talking about is this traditional approach to application testing. So normally when you're thinking about going to a new platform, what you do is you go and take those applications and you actually go and give them to a group of users, and they might be first or second line or people in IT team, and you're going to give them to them to test. And what they do is they install it on the target platform and they fire it up and they do what normally is a smoke test. So did it launch? Maybe I could do file print, something like that. But the reality is that that's not a very good test because those users or the people testing are not the end users, and quite often those applications require a bit of knowledge on how they work to use all the functions. An example would be AutoCAD, which has thousands and thousands of options on how you can do stuff. So that quality is often variable, and quite often, even if they do find a problem, it's difficult to identify what that problem is. So you might get a error message that says catastrophic error, which is not very helpful for you to try and narrow it down. And quite often I've seen those sort of things as catastrophic error. It might be like a hard-coded file with any path or something like that. So it might not be a catastrophic error. It could be something quite easily to fix. So they've gone and done all that testing, but what about all those other technologies? So if you're considering going to AppV, if maybe it's not going to work on Windows 10, you want to put it in a XenApp environment, or you want to use some other technology, how is that going to... Normally what you do is, okay, well, it works on Windows 10, can I AppV it now? I'm going to send it through the AppV sequencing process, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, I'm going to see how long I spend fixing it, and then go back to the business and tell them I could or couldn't do it based on the outcome. So the way that we try and resolve this at Citrix is we've got a product called AppDNA. And the way that that works is we take those files, those applications that you've got, and we import that into a database. And we run some rules against them, and out we spit as these reports, which give you a green, amber, red on the suitability of that application. Now, I can import about 200 applications in a day and run those reports overnight and get that information within the next day. So you can kind of see with a project of Aaron's size, we could probably do this exercise within 5 days and get him some very good understanding of where his problems are going to be with his applications. The benefit of this is obviously we're looking for within the code, so you don't have to go and test every function. We're actually looking at the applications themselves, the DLLs, the registry keys, the any files, all of those sort of things to see if there's any potential problems. The other benefit of this too is that we're actually testing for multiple operating systems. So not just for Windows 10, we can produce reports for server-based OSs, XenApp or AppV.
So just on that, Wade, I have a lot of packages that are sitting in SSCM at the moment. How am I going to get them across into AppDNA so I can get that testing done? What's the best process for that?
Well, it's actually, there's two ways you could do it. The easiest way is AppDNA's got this, basically what you can do is point it at your application repository. So where your applications live, there'll be a distribution point for SCCM or packaging share where you keep all your master copies of your apps. You can point AppDNA at that. It will go and find all the MSIs and import them. If they're setup.exes, we'll have to capture those through a capture process and pull them in. And lastly, if you've got even maybe some AppV packages, we can actually import them too. The other way you could do this with SCCM is you can point AppDNA to SCCM database. So if you wanted to obviously maintain this database over a long period of time, you point at SCCM. As things get put into SCCM, it gets imported into AppDNA automatically. And you can have a true reflection of what's out in your production environment. So that's how we basically manage that. So just to go through the process for you, so just so you can understand this a little bit better. So we take your apps, we import them, we crack it open, we look at all the metadata, we pull that into a database, we run some heuristic algorithms, and what I mean by that is that we check how the applications work against a Trojan operating system, and if they interoperate properly with each other. So if there's dependencies, and if there's missing dependencies, what they are. So there's a number of checks that we do. After that, we give you a report, which is, again, the green, amber, red, or the traffic light system, and that gives you a little bit of direction on where to go with your applications. And then after that, we'll take those reports, and they'll have some remediation information on how to fix that.
That sounds great. Does that mean that I can tell my testing manager I can start to reduce some headcount in that space, or am I going to have to keep some of those guys around? Or how does that work?
Yes and no. I suppose my theory behind this is that most migration projects are normally understaffed anyway. So what this is going to do, it's not really there to replace a process or replace a person or something like that. It's there to slot into those processes that you would normally have just to speed them up. So and there to give you some direction. So to give you an understanding what I mean, I'll first explain to you what the green, amber, red means so you can get a bit of understanding of the information we're giving you. So when we say green, it means that we found no potential issues with it, or no issues with that application. So normally you'd have in your portfolio of 400, you might have 200 or 250 of those that are just going to work with no intervention, going from, or actually you're going from a 32-bit to 64-bit platform, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
So there's definitely some potential conflicts there with drivers and 16-bit code. So you might have a little bit less, but quite often I see about 60% of apps, regardless of what platform you're going to, work without any intervention. So instead of sending this to your expensive packaging team or the guys that are your second and third level engineers, let's send them straight to the UAT and get those UAT'd as quickly as possible. There might be some that fail because we don't know every single problem that an app could potentially have, but we know about all the major ones. So we're going to give you a likelihood of that passing. So let's send it straight to UAT. We've saved some time there. The next one is yellow or amber, and this is where we found what we'll consider maybe a potential issue. An example of this would be a 32-bit driver. On a 64-bit platform, if it's a kernel mode driver, we know for sure it's not going to work. So in the header of the driver will be a little flag that says kernel mode, and we'll come back and go, that's red. You need to find an alternative for this application or a newer driver or a 64-bit compatible one. If it's not a kernel mode driver, some software-based drivers will work on a 64-bit operating system or 32-bit. It could be a kernel mode driver. The developer could be lazy and not have marked the header. Not that they do that ever, but it sometimes happens.
Not in my organization.
Yeah, no, of course not. And so we'll go and say, here's the driver, this is what you need to test. So give you a lot more focused testing, as opposed to going, well, that didn't work, and I've got no idea where to go from here. And lastly, the red one, which I've given you a few examples already, 16-bit code, kernel mode drivers. A lot of times those are unfixable. Some things can be fixed that are red. So a typical example of ones that could be fixed is an application that needs elevated permissions for it to run. And again, they haven't put in the header of that executable that it needs elevated permissions. It's going to try and run just as a standard user and crash somehow. So you could go and create what's called a shim. And for those who are not familiar with shims are a bit of basically backward compatible code that is in every operating system that I know of since Windows XP. It might even be before that. And the way it works is it emulates how the previous version of the operating system worked. So you can go and associate that bit of code and it just intercepts it. So you could simulate, in this case, you could create a shim that says, when I launch this app, ask for elevated permissions and therefore it will work. So there are ways to get around it, but that normally requires quite a deep level of understanding on app compatibility. But the benefit of obviously AppDNA is it's going to give you those recommendations on how to fix it and when shims are going to work. So with that in mind, there's two types of reports with AppDNA. And one is what I would normally give to the project manager. And the reason why I give this to the project manager is because this gives you, or the person in charge of it, might not be the project manager, might be the CTO or the CIO or whoever is driving this initiative, and they're the person deciding on the budget and how long this should take. In this case, I've got what's called my portfolio report. And this is actually, I've combined two technologies for this report. So I've included Windows 10 and AppV. On the left-hand side is what I'd call my before action summary. And that's showing me the way my applications look at this moment. This is a lot worse than I see in most organizations, just because if I had all green apps in my test database, there would be nothing to show people. So I import applications I know are a bit tricky. On the right-hand side is my applications that I know, or once I've implemented the recommendations that AppDNA are making, I think there's still a number of those apps I could fix. There's still a couple that I'm not sure of, and these are the ones where I'm going, it could be a driver that might or might not work, but you need to test that. And there's still quite a few that are red that are definitely never going to work, and there's no ways I'm going to be able to fix them. So that's and from a project manager, you can actually go and start going, well, if most of these apps are going to be able to work, or 60%, I can send them to UAT, and I say maybe 5% of those, and it's going to take me this much time, and those ones that are amber, I can send them to my packaging team. So normally they take 5 days or 10 days or 3 days, depending on their skill set, to fix these sort of things, so I can kind of figure that out. And the red ones, that's, I think, one of the most critical ones, because normally during a migration project, what you'd do is you'd identify the first business unit and you'd get their applications ready. And you'd go, okay, well, those are ready, they've built the SOE, and we'll roll them out. And we hit the next business unit and we start fixing their apps and getting it ready. And then you hit the third business unit and it's got a problem. It's got a critical app that no longer works. It's 10 years old. It's got some code in it. And that could be a business critical app. It could be a major enterprise app. Maybe it's something like SAP. And all of a sudden you're stopping your project and you're going back to the bosses and going, we have to upgrade SAP. It's going to take us 2 years and $5 million. And that normally is a horrible conversation to have at any point of any project. So you can obviously start identifying what we call the big rocks or the big problems, and address those at the beginning of your project during your planning phase so you can scope this correctly. I used to do this all the time before I joined Citrix, and I've never ever worked on an app migration project that was in time and budget. there's always what's called the long tail, and this is to hopefully would reduce that impact and that, I suppose, that tail that you have at every project. The next part of this is the detailed remediation reports, and this is the one that you want to give to your packages or your testing team. And this is actually for each individual application, and this is telling you exactly what's wrong with that app. In this case, we've identified some hard-coded INI files. If you were going from 32-bit to 32-bit, this wouldn't be a problem. But because you're going from 32-bit to 64-bit, this hard-coded entry on the right-hand side here is going to be now C program files x86, so it's probably going to break at some point. Now, again, this could be quite difficult to identify. It might have been some generic error message that says error, and you go, okay, well, what does that mean? And you might spend a day or two or maybe even a week trying to find that. This, you're giving them a lot more targeted stuff. Fix this, and we'll see how it goes from there. And again, we're identifying the file name and the path to that and how to remediate it. The next example was, again, 16-bit code. I've used this a few times, and again, we're identifying the file name and its location. And in this case, we've given you some additional information, so you could click on that, and it will tell you why 16-bit code no longer works on a 64-bit platform and all the technical jargon and the limitations of that moving forward. And I suppose that's just very handy because those conversations I used to have with people, because I used to do a lot of outsourced packaging work, I'd go to my customer and they'd say, get this working on Windows 10, and I'll try and get it working. I'll go back and it doesn't work. And they're like, well, how hard did you try? How good are you? I think you should try harder. And this goes and says, well, here's a document, says it's red, it's 16-bit code, there's nothing I can do about it. We need to find an alternative solution, and it's not my problem, it's the project's problem to resolve. So it helps with those difficult conversations that you will have throughout your project, essentially, and gets the right answer.
Also sounds like I could potentially send this report to my packaging team ahead of time so I know myself what apps will work and where I want them to focus their time and effort on as well.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I did have is that I do use AppV within my environment. So how does this, I guess, inspect my AppV packages that I'm deploying out there? But as I also touched on, I've got over 100 web apps which I'm concerned about, and I want to make sure that they're going to work across the new browsers that we're introducing into Windows 10 like Edge. How does this tool help me in that space?
Well, yeah, you're right. So there's a lot of, and it's uncanny how those questions just flow straight into the next slide. I don't know how I've done this.
It's almost like we planned it.
But so it's basically, I've got so it's not just about Windows 10. We can test for a number of technologies, and obviously AppV has been around for a while. It's the de facto app virtualization if you want to deploy it to a virtual desktop or physical desktop or into XenApp environment. We use it quite often to solve certain problems. But there's other technologies, XenApp, if you want to see if an application is suitable for XenApp, we can produce a report. All those different operating systems for server or desktop-based, and then also the web browsers that we can actually figure out if those applications are going to work for the different web browsers or plugins that are compatible and that sort of thing. And you're right, the AppV packages, you can get more reports, so you can get a better understanding which ones are going to work and what you can do to get them working. And those existing AppV packages, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be able to import those and inspect those too for its compatibility for the next platform.
Awesome. All right, so you've covered off the application compatibility sore points that I had. What's the best way to deliver these apps? Like, what are my options? How do I get them out to my new Windows 10 devices?
Well, you're right. So now you kind of understand which applications are going to work with which technology. It's really what technologies do I use to deliver it. And I think the best way to give you an understanding of what is out there and what sort of technologies you have to deploy these apps and the impact and I suppose their features and characteristics of each. So I see there's actually 4 main categories of application deployment, and this is what most of my customers are looking at the moment. First one, Windows Installer. That's been around since Office 2000. Microsoft created it because before that, we had this thing called DLL hell. And there was all these different installers. There was actually even an Acme installer previously that used to go and override other DLLs, and you'd take that off and it'd strip DLLs off and apps would break. So Microsoft said there's a much better way to do this. They created the Windows Installer framework, which kind of managed that a bit better, managed the DLL hell process, made sure that DLLs that were in use were no longer stripped off the box. And if they were, they would repair themselves. And a lot of applications come in Windows Installer format now, but There's just some complexity sometimes depending on the quality of the Windows installer package, getting them working in large enterprise environments. You still need specific skill sets to manage them. And the type of problems that you're going to see if you don't do this well is you launch an application and it's asking users to register their app, and there's shortcuts on there that they know they don't use. There might be an uninstall shortcut and the user keeps on uninstalling the app because they don't think they're needing it, and SCCM keeps on pushing it down. So those are the things that happen if you don't manage the Windows installer component properly. The next part is AppV, and AppV came about because it really was trying to solve this problem where you've got, say, Office 2016 or an Office 2010, and you want to use both versions on the same machine, but they're both kind of sharing one needs an older version of a DLL, the other one will only work with the newer version. So how do I manage that? So you put one of them, probably the one that you use the least, into an AppV bubble, deploy that to the machine, and that isolates it from the rest of the operating system. So it's not dependent, it's running on its own isolation, it's got its own DLLs and registry keys. With AppV, there's only two ways you can normally launch an AppV application. That's via shortcut or via file association. So you click on a file association. So all those other hooks that you normally have into an app, like type libraries, class IDs, prog IDs, all of those sort of things, more often are not going to work, and you start getting into a bit of the complexities of getting this AppV bubble talking to that one, the management overhead there. Next one is Citrix XenApp, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this product, which Citrix is bread and butter for the last 25 years in some form or another. We like to change the name now and then.
Favorite technology at Acme Corp.
Yeah. So the XenApp itself, this is actually taking those applications and moving it into the data center. And once it's in the data center, it's actually decoupled completely from the local OS. So it's just presenting the screen and the keyboard and mouse. And the last one is application layering. So application layering is a newish technology. It's only been around for a number of years, but that's essentially you take an app and you put it into its own virtual disk. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a while. So just covering off the Windows installer again. So this is, again, created by Microsoft. It's there to, I suppose, help manage those applications, and it's the de facto one, and you'll see most applications come like that these days. The AppV, it's got all those, it's industry standard for application isolation. There were quite a few around, but I suppose it's definitely had the biggest number of supports, and why AppV is probably the most popular is that it's not, you sometimes need a recipe or understanding of how to get that thing in an AppV bubble, and there's a lot of people that have written those things and figured it out, where those other virtualization technologies that weren't as popular haven't got those people figuring it out. So hence the more people that use it, the more popular it gets. The XenApp, so the benefit of XenApp obviously is once you've actually moved those applications into your data center, it starts unlocking all those other benefits that you normally talk about with BYO or remote working and all that sort of thing. So if you're decoupling the apps from the desktop, you actually open up a lot of other use cases besides just the operational point of view. And like I said, do you have a question, sorry?
Yeah, so I was going to say, we use XenApp, we use AppV as well in our organisation. We like them both, but I want to be able to use them together where I can, and I've got concerns about having to spin up both infrastructure and have to manage both infrastructure. Well, how can I simplify that, and how can I get the best out of both?
Well, you're right. There's definitely some use cases, and quite often you'd find people that are deploying a XenApp infrastructure, they might AppV their applications before putting, and that helps with some of the image management stuff that you might run into when you're managing a large XenApp deployment. There's some we've basically introduced a couple of versions ago with the latest version of XenApp and Zen Desktop that you no longer need the Microsoft infrastructure to stream applications into your virtual desktops or into your XenApp environment. So the delivery controllers themselves will become your streaming servers, and they'll stream it to the VDA. So, and yeah, that's a very valid use case combining those two technologies. And then lastly, the application layering. So I mentioned this, you go and take your application and you install them into a layer or a virtual disk. And think of this as like snapshotting on a hypervisor. So you've got your base image and you go and you make a snapshot, and then you launch it, and you go and make some changes, and that gets saved into like a differential disk. And this is a very similar concept. Instead of, you have your base operating system layer, and you have what's called a platform layer with some tools in it, and then each application will be put into a layer.
So I'm starting to hear a lot about this app layering technology, and I know there's some other players in the market. Can you dive into a little bit more detail how it works and how I can get the best out of it in my organisation?
No, definitely. Well, I think there's most app layering technology, they kind of do what's called on-demand layering. But with Unidesk, and what makes it so special is it's got two main use cases. And the first one is that image creation process, or what we call the image layer creation process. So on the right-hand side here, we've got what's called the Enterprise Layer Manager, and that's a virtual appliance. And inside that, we've got a couple of virtual disks with Windows 2012 and Windows 10 running on them. And we've got a number of other virtual disks which have got VMware tools or Hyper-V tools or your XenApp virtual, your VDA. And then we've got a number of applications delivered into each of those layers. And those are all separate layers. Now, when you're going and creating your image, and those of you out there, those XenApp environments, you might have one gold image, you might have multiple gold images, and you might have processes for that using SCCM task sequences or MDT, or you might just manually crack it open and apply some patches, uninstall the old app, and reinstall the new app. And the more you do those sort of things to your image, the more likely it's going to be corrupted, especially if you're uninstalling old apps. You're going to have DLLs left behind, registry keys, and conflicts might happen. So it's quite often you see people building this thing from scratch just to get around that. So what we do with the Unidesk products and the layer manager is that we go and create a single disk out of that. So I go and select a number of applications, my platform that I want to deploy it to. So in this case, it's going to be XenApp, and it's going to embed the VDA agent, and I'm going to go and compress that into one single VHD. And then I can go and use that on any number of platforms. It could be on XenApp, it could be on Hyper-V, it could be on Xen Server, it could be in Azure. And that's helping with the image management process. The next part of this is what we'd call guest layering services. And in this way, we take those same application layers, we copy it to a UNC path, and at boot up, the user it goes and checks who's logging in and goes and grabs those layers that it requires and applies that to the session that the user's logging into. So for those, imagine that with the snapshot, the differential snapshot, so it's the same sort of technology. So you can kind of simplify your base OS and actually start putting more things into layers and get applied to the user's environment at boot time.
So you're telling me that I no longer have to manage multiple SOEs. All I'm going to need is just one image, and that's it, nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. So say you've only got 10 apps in your environment, so you're probably only dealing with one gold image, but there's some larger organizations that have got multiple gold images, and they might have 10 or 20, depending on the different departments they deal with. So to give you an understanding, I've got my layered image on the left, so I've got Windows 2012 R2, I've got all my applications in separate layers. I want to update 2012 R2, I go and patch just the operating system layer, and then I go and regenerate all those images, and it comes and spits them out. So it goes, I'm not going and opening up 3 images, I'm just opening up one layer, patching that. And this is essentially reducing, in this case, the management of patching this environment by 2/3. And this is traditionally where all the overhead of managing a XenApp or Xen desktop environment comes in maintaining these gold images. The infrastructure is normally quite consistent. It's the actual workloads that require quite a lot of the maintenance and effort. So just to give you an understanding of that process of how the layering, so you would go and create what's called an image template, and you'll say, I'm going to have Windows Server 2012, I'm going to deploy that to Hyper-V, and I'm going to have these applications. And that template is what you'd use to regenerate those images over and over again. So you could go and patch the Windows 2012, hit the button, and it'll go and create the template. If you're using something like PVS, you can actually suck those VHDs straight in, or you can go manually import them. It's up to you. And like I said, we support a number of hypervisors for that platform.
So that sounds great. You touched on something called elastic layering before, where users get apps assigned at login. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail? That sounds fantastic. Like, I can just have a blank image and users get apps on demand. Like, that's great.
Yes, exactly. That's the whole concept of this. So I've got my base VDI, and you could have no apps in there. You could have a number of apps in there. It's in your base image. And in this case, for my Windows 10 environment, so if I went Windows 10 VDI, one of the things that you normally would have in this scenario, you might use AppV to try and simplify that image, but not everything could be put into AppV. So if it doesn't go to AppV, I've got to put it in my gold image. In this case, you could actually have your base apps, which are all consistent. Maybe there's 10 of them. And then all your applications, you still could use maybe AppV, or you could start putting them into layers. And what happens is, as the user logs in, it goes to that Elastic repository, goes and grabs those layers and applies it to the user. There's basically a layering service that runs on the machine to enable that. And it's the same for a XenApp environment, and this is where it gets really cool, is that for each user that logs into their session, they will get specific disks applied. So again, even if you have multiple gold images, you could start simplifying that, have one gold image with your base apps in it, and a user's getting those layers added at demand, on demand. And it's going to simplify and that helps in a number of ways. So simplifies your gold images, and so if you've got, I've seen scenarios where there's an application that doesn't work with another app, so they go and spin up a whole separate virtual machine to manage that, and there's only got 5 users on it, and it's really over-resourced for it, or they might have a number of those scenarios where they're not getting the maximum number of users on a virtual machine, and they're spending a lot more money on tin to manage that scenario.
So one of the questions that I do have, so I've got significant investment at the moment with on-prem storage and infrastructure and other bits and pieces like that. And I'm starting to go to look to Azure, and we're looking to use it in the first instance in a DR and BCP capability. One of the problems that we have is that we're going to have to maintain 2 types of images. I see this as a good fit on how I could quite quickly and easily dynamically move to the cloud. Is that something that's available today, or?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So one of the major benefits of this is around the fact that you can start moving these layers straight into Azure. So to give you a summary of what this might look like is, I've got my Elastic layering repository, and I've updated my layers, and I'm just updating the one layer. You might have another data center, which is just your backup data center, and you're maintaining that while you're migrating that into Azure and getting that all up and running. And you might go and copy those Elastic layers. So I've just updated my one app in the image layer manager, and then that's copied us into Azure. So instead of managing, I suppose, all these images, and the same thing can happen, I suppose, for the virtual disks too. You can actually go and export that. So you're only patching once, as opposed to using, say, PVS for on-premise and creating an image that way, and then going into Azure and using another process to create your images and putting the exact same apps in it and trying to patch it to the same level. It's just one process for all of those platforms.
Yeah, that sounds great. The only question I've got is, what's the catch?
Well, yes.
It sounds great.
There's always a catch, and I suppose there's a limitation with layering technology across the board, and it's not just limited to Unidesk. This is every single layering product. And basically the limitation is, the more layers you apply, the user experience starts degrading. And the reason being is that there's a little driver that sits there, and it goes and looks for the files of the registry keys, and it hunts around for it, and basically goes and says, okay, well, there's the file. And we kind of done some testing. It's like 20, 25, depending on the applications and how big they are and that sort of thing. You might get them a bit bigger. So the user experience isn't great, but the admin experience is great. So what we want to do is try and get a little bit of a halfway between that.
I keep my testing manager happy.
Yeah, no, definitely. But yeah, the users won't be. So what we want to do, what a lot of those other technologies are suggesting is, well, once you start hitting that limit, let's start putting those applications into multiple apps into a single layer. And it kind of comes back to that same issue that we've been dealing with, which is, well, now I've got, how do I manage that layer? Do I recreate it from scratch? Do I open it up and patch that app, or uninstall it and put the other layer in? And it's just like, well, what happens if I don't want to give someone GoToMeeting and Skype? Like, how do I manage those layers? And it just becomes another administrative overhead. So the user experience is good again, but the admin experience is bad. So, and this is where Unidesk is quite unique. The way that we think we can handle this is in a number of ways. So the first one is to help with that image layer creation process. So we can take most of the apps and put them into the layering process, and you've got a nice, easy way to update your images. And those additional applications that you want to apply on top of that, then we go and use that, the guest layering services. So you probably won't get to a scenario, I don't know any users that use more than 20 or 30 applications. So if you've got 10 applications in the base OS, and you've got the rest being delivered by app layering. But the reality is that you probably would use a mixture of those.
Yeah, okay. So I wouldn't just use Unidesk? So should you just use app layering across the whole organisation, or?
Well, you could if you've got a nice limited number of applications, but the thing I want to show you is really where the one thing that you won't fix with layering is application compatibility. So if you've got an application that's business critical, you can't upgrade it because of the time frames that you've got, or the cost of that is going to blow out your project. The only way you can really fix that is by moving that into XenApp. So there's different limitations, but that's the main reason why you probably wouldn't be able to use layering for everything, is because of those apps that wouldn't be compatible with Windows 10, or those, say, 32-bit or 16-bit apps. For example, you want to deliver to that 64-bit operating system, and you've got no way of getting rid of them. You put them in XenApp to fix that.
Okay, sounds good.
So I suppose bringing this all together, like I said, I think there's multiple ways you should manage your environment. And quite often where I see people fail in migration projects, it's really where they go, we're going to use AppV, and then they try and hammer everything into AppV, and they realize halfway through the project that it's not going to work, and they go, okay, we'll stand up an exception, and they try and fight that exception, oh, we're not going to use it every time. And the best way to do this is to actually go, okay, we're going to use all four of these technologies. And the reason being is that I'm going to have processes for them. I'm not going to force an app into a technology where it doesn't belong. I'm going to choose the best fit for each one. So what you might end up with your Windows 10 workspace is this scenario where I've got Adobe Acrobat and Microsoft Office that's been delivered into the base image. I've got some additional applications being delivered as an AppV because I'm already using AppV, for example, or maybe I don't want to use AppV, I just want to use XenApp or app layering. I might have some of those other apps being delivered via XenApp, and this could be for a number of reasons. Maybe it's security, or strategic-wise, you want to make those applications available remotely to other users. Let's not go and deploy them to the physical machine and XenApp, and you go and put them in XenApp. And you might have those applications that don't fit into any of those put into the layering process or the guest layering. And this might look very different depending on the user. So one user might have more apps in XenApp or less apps in XenApp and more in layering. But I very much doubt if you use a combination of these technologies, you're going to get a very good user experience, very good management of that environment, and you're also not going to hit that app layering limit that basically layering has that limit across the board.
Yeah, okay, that all makes sense. So you've covered off, the compatibility problems and concerns that I had. You've also covered off how I can traditionally, I guess, deploy my traditional apps that I have today. The one thing you haven't touched on yet is the web apps. So what can you help me with in this space, and what's new, I guess?
So it's funny because IE is the #1 published application in XenApp in the world.
So we published that already today. So how's that any different?
Well, yeah, there's some stuff we've done, and it's really around the user experience. So I suppose one of the things with publishing IE and the downside of that is, when do I use that? When the user has to know, well, I can only get access to this website when I go through Storefront and click on that browser, and it can be a bit confusing. They could open up their normal IE on their desktop and try and launch an app, and it doesn't work. So or it's having errors, and they phone in the help desk, and the help desk is logging a call and then getting someone to look at it, and it's wasting time, and so the user's not happy with the experience they're having. So what we did was we created what's called the Citrix Secure Browser Service. And what this does is you basically go and generate a URL that is kind of like a shortcut into your storefront. So it's basically we take the storefront APIs and we manipulate it, and we generate a URL. So you take that URL and you put it into your favorites, or embed it into your intranet site, and when you click on that, it goes and actually launches a XenApp session with that browser version and that website running in the back end of that.
So it's completely seamless to the end user?
Yeah, so especially, or it depends. So if there's anonymous access and that sort of thing, or you enable single sign-on, you could actually single sign the user into it. If you want to put some additional security around it, you could still get the NetScaler to prompt them for their credentials before logging them in. So you can control that sort of behavior. And the use cases that we're seeing for virtualizing IE is obviously around plugin management. We've all been in that scenario, and I'm sure you've got the scenario now where you've got applications that require specific versions of Java.
Yep. And
how do I manage that? Do I put it in IE, or do I AppV it? And there's AppV recipes out there, but they can be pretty tricky. Aaron Parker, I don't know if you guys know him, he wrote a brilliant blog in Stealth Puppy on how to virtualize AppV. Virtualize Java in AppV, so go and have a look at that. But obviously putting it in XenApp is going to help with those sort of plugins. The other thing is obviously backwards compatibility with different versions of IE. I know I've got an app myself that only works in Chrome.
Yeah, our Dynamite app only works in IE6. So.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I don't know if we can help you with that. That's probably not supported anymore. You're probably going to have to get that remediated some other way. But it's kind of not a supported platform for anyone. But it's probably worthwhile, yeah, getting that one fixed. But again, that's another massive use case. You don't want to go and, I suppose, start running a 2003 operating system and paying a lot of extended support for it. Another thing that we've seen a lot of popular use for this is when you've got a lot of my customers are large banks, and they go through a security audit, and they're saying, well, this web app is dumping all these cookies and stuff and data, and it's not very security conscious. So if you're hosting that browser in the data center or in Azure or wherever else you want to run it out of, that's in a secure environment. Users probably don't have access to that, so they won't be able to find the cookies on their local machine and crack it open and see details they're not allowed to see. And lastly, the zero endpoint configuration. So regardless of the device, as long as it's an HTML5 browser, they'll be able to get access to the service. So, and just to give you an understanding of what it looks like, so I've got my URL. I click on that, and say I'm running Microsoft Edge. I'll see my Edge browser, and in my HTML5 browser, it will launch the Citrix receiver for HTML5. So it's kind of clientless. You don't actually have to go and put Citrix receiver on the machine. It runs within the HTML5 browser, and it's pretty much transparent to the end user. They wouldn't even know that they're in Chrome. It might take a little bit longer for them to log in and get the web page, but that would be the only indication that it's doing anything funky in the background.
Sounds great. So you've covered off all my web app concerns now and show me how I can sort of get those out to my users across different platforms. So now I want to talk about Windows 10, and I keep getting told that Windows 10 is a service and that we're going to have to try and keep up pace with all the innovation that Microsoft's doing. How can you help me keep up with that while focusing on all my awesome Acme products?
Well, yeah, you're right. And I suppose that your testing manager, I suppose he's in the same boat as a lot of organizations where they're looking at Windows 10 and this new Windows 10 as a service. So the thing that's very different about Windows 10 as a service compared to, say, like Windows 7, you would have these service packs that you could install or not install depending on the application compatibility, and you got to decide when that would happen. And if it didn't work, you could always stay on the build you're on, and if it got to the end of its life cycle, you could get extended support for that. Now, it's a bit different with Windows 10, so there's going to be this continuous evolution, and we've kind of seen a number of these anniversary updates drop and mid-year updates as such that's come. And the way the service works is on the far left, the feedback loop, that's the Windows Insider Preview. So who's on Windows Insider Preview? So yeah, quite a few geeks in the room, that's nice to see. So basically, those guys are making sure everything works. They're feeding back information to Microsoft and saying, this was nice, this wasn't nice, we had this problem. Microsoft's working on that, trying to fix it. And once they're happy with it, they've got all those issues resolved, they're happy with the feature set, they're going to release that, and that's going to become current branch. And that's for all those other people that, like me, I don't have time to play with Windows Insider Preview these days, and I'm a bit more salesy, so I like to have a more stable operating system, and I'm going to run my current branch at home. And that's the one that most of you guys would have seen in probably about August. There was a current branch dropped at home, and they changed the start menu slightly and added additional features. After 4 months, we are constantly feeding back to Microsoft. There's a whole lot of analytics and reports going back, and that probably didn't work and that sort of thing. And Microsoft's working really hard to make sure that all those things are fixed. And after about 4 months, they get what's released as the current business branch. And this is what most organizations will want to roll out. Unless you kind of don't care about user experience and that sort of thing, and the long-term service release is an option, but it's not going to have all the cool features like Cortana and the biometrics. It's going to be really what Microsoft is saying is use that for an ATM or a parking meter. Don't give that to your users because it's not going to be a good experience for them. And depending on how long, or basically when the next build gets dropped, you might have 12 to 22 months of that build being, I suppose, in its life cycle. At the end of that life cycle, you have a 60-day grace, and you stop getting security updates. There's no extended support. You have to be off that build, essentially. So what this actually starts looking like is the Windows 10 release cycle. So we've already had the first 3, and you can see there's quite a bit of overlap. So the July release in 2015, there was a November 2015 release, and then the anniversary update in 2016, which had quite a few features in it that changed. And there's a hypothetical date of somewhere in this year that it will be dropping at mid-year, another version. So this is probably where your testing manager is a bit concerned. I suppose there's changes coming to his organization, stuff that he's got to be worried about. He's got to make sure that it works. So he's probably concerned that now that he's got not just security updates that he's got to worry about, there could be some additional features that are coming down. And like I said, Microsoft's working really hard to make sure that none of those things break, but it is a change to your environment. And I suppose there's how much risk do we take with not testing our applications when applying a change? So what they probably looks like is once you start looking at your testing, is that you might go and do your initial testing for Windows 10 to get to there, and it might take you pretty much the whole life cycle, depending on your application portfolio, to get to the end of your testing regime. But you get there and you go, hold on, I've got to actually get off this build. Lucky enough, Microsoft aren't making you go straight to the next build. You can skip the release, the next one, but you can only do one release skip. And after that, you have to do, I think, a wipe and load of that machine. So what you start looking like is, well, okay, I'm going to only test my business critical apps, but what is a business critical app? Is it the executives apps? Is it the one that makes the most money? Is it the one used by the most number of people? And if you ask me as a user of IT, I'd say all my apps are critical and I can't do my job without them. So it's essential to get everyone working at some point. And if you have a lot of users that are having problems, very quickly the attention is going to be focusing on IT and why is this happening and what are you guys doing to mitigate it? So the way that I think we can help resolve this, and I suppose this is where, and this actually came to me, like I didn't come up with this idea. I have a large bank customer come to me and they said the only way they can see them maintaining this testing regime, reducing the risk of things going wrong, is they're going to leverage ZenApp. And basically what they want to do is they want to decouple the apps and the data from the desktop. So that desktop essentially is an entity on its own, and the applications are presented back to it. The data stuff is a completely different subject, and that's using OneDrive and ShareFile and putting stuff in the cloud, and there's lots of benefits of doing that, but I want to focus on the apps piece for now, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Cool.
That's
cool.
my main concern for today.
So talking about ZenApp, and what we're doing here is we've got your applications running on your physical machine or your virtual desktop, and we move that into the data center or into Azure, and we start presenting that back to the end user. So that desktop that they've got, that could be a very simple desktop now. Instead of having 20 or 30 apps or 100 or 1,000 applications, depending on your portfolio, dependent on the Windows 10 OS, we're only making those core applications, Office, Adobe Reader, those sort of things that are common across the environment. And the benefit here is actually what your testing looks like after this. So essentially what you can do is you only have to test your core apps. And those core apps are normally not the ones that give you problems. Office is going to work, Adobe Reader is going to work, .NET Framework is going to work, Java maybe, you might have to fiddle around with that. But it gets a bit, and because you can test those things, you could probably test that within a day or a week, depending on the amount of testing you do. You could probably go to every release. You could go, well, we want that feature and we want it now, so I'm going to roll that out tomorrow because I know my apps are going to work. And those applications that are hosted in the data center, maybe running Windows 2012 or 2016, those have got 5 years of life and 5 years of extended support in case I do run into a problem. And for your next major upgrade, you can go and say, well, I'm not worrying about my apps. All I'm worrying about is my user. So it kind of simplifies the next phase of your rollout for whatever platform that's going to be next after Windows 10. So there's another part of this too, which is about managing those. If you want to go VDI, there's some benefits of that too. And the way that we've done this, and this has been around for years, is you want to virtualize your desktop. And again, the benefit of this is that we take it from the base operating system or the physical machine, we put it into the data center or into Azure, and we present that back to the end user. Now, if you want to update that, you just have, and say you're using something like PVS from Citrix, you have a single image. You can update it, or you could use the Unidesk layering, image layering process, and you can go and create a new image, and then you can go and deploy that to every single user just by updating their image in the data center, and that gets delivered to them when they log into Citrix Receiver. They'll see the newer desktop.
I can actually see a really good use case here, even when I'm using SSEM to my physical devices. Like, because I've abstracted my apps, I could simply just push out Windows 10 and then present my apps to them.
Yeah, basically. So yeah, it doesn't matter if it's a virtual desktop or not, but the benefit of being a virtual desktop is, say, you do push down a build and there is some problems, you can easily roll that back. So you just get the user to reboot and point them to the old image again. So in this case, we've got the Citrix PVS server, and you've got one image that is being streamed to multiple users. And with the use of, like, say, Unidesk app layering, there's a personalization layer where you can go and start saving users' wallpapers and stuff. So similar to the Citrix personal V-disks that we used to have, but way better if you guys had any experience with that.
Well, it sounds all pretty good. Can you show me how it looks?
No, definitely. So I think the best way for me to explain this was show you what happened when Citrix went to Windows 10. So this actually is a real life story. This happened to me when I was, it was the day before Windows 10 was released. And my machine's going to sleep. There we go. So the day before Windows 10 was released, I was in my Windows 7 desktop. And I'll launch that. And this Windows 7 desktop, this is my production environment. This is how I work at Citrix. This is running out of Singapore. So, and I'm using the HTML5 receiver here. So I'm not using it's a clientless receiver essentially. So I was in my Windows 7 desktop. I had a customer who asked me to do some technical work. They had some problems with the XML file they were using to import some stuff. And I went in there and I had a look and I was like, okay, I think I can fix this. So I had Notepad++ open, and I'll just launch that in a second. And it's just starting up. And my application, I've got my virtual desktop, which has been delivered out of the data center, and I've got my applications in XenApp, and they've been basically delivered into my virtual desktop. And I was in Notepad++, like I said, I was doing some work, editing the document, the XML file that I had open. And I was actually called, halfway through the work I was doing, I was called into a meeting. And I actually didn't get a chance to go back to that document I was working on. So I'll just show you where I was. I had that open. Open my file that I was editing. And I'll go and make some changes to it so you can actually see that it's not smoke and mirrors. So we'll call this Ignite 2017. So let's actually make this a little bit more compliant with XML, just as opposed to not having free text in there with going to cause some errors. So I went and made some changes. I went to that meeting and it actually ended up running over, and I was at the end of it, I was like, I'm over this, I'm going home. I'll finish that tomorrow. And the next morning I was actually working from home. So I basically I woke up, I forgot Windows 10 was actually being released. And I logged into my Citrix receiver and I saw my Windows 10 desktop there. And I'm not lying, we rolled out Windows 10 the day it was released. And the reason why we were able to do that was, first of all, we were using VDR, so it was easy to deliver it to me. And secondly was because my desktop was much simplified because I only had my core applications in there, Skype for Business, Office, and some Adobe Reader and that sort of thing. So I launched my Windows 10 desktop, it logged me in. I was quite impressed. I was like, oh, that looks quite nice. I'd kind of seen some videos of it. And I was like, oh yes, I was busy working on that Notepad++. I better go and finish off that work I was doing. So just give it a second for it to catch up. It's just connecting. And again, this desktop's running out of Singapore. And I'm on the Wi-Fi with all of you guys. Contention, so it's pretty good performance, I think.
All out of a browser too.
All out of a browser. And I double-clicked on my Notepad++ and roamed my application over from my Windows 7 environment into my Windows 10, and it's exactly where I left it off. And again, highlighting, I suppose, the power of this. So it's not just simplifying for me to migrate from one operating system to another or one build to another, and this would be the same for Windows 10 build. It's just I can go and work on this wherever I want. I could have roamed this too. I could have just roamed the Notepad++ to my machine and not worried about launching my desktop because it's giving me that flexibility.
So I could get my Dynamite app over there too if I really wanted to.
Yeah, definitely. And that's obviously going to give you all that flexibility that we've talked about. So,
Over to me.
yep.
So I guess at the end of this meeting, some of the key takeaways that I've had is I can leverage AppDNA through XenApp and XenDesktop to do application compatibility testing for my 32, 64 bits across a different range of platforms, so Windows Server, Windows 10, and a range of different browsers. I don't have to compromise on technology. I have a range of different options available to me that I can, present out to my users, and it gives me the flexibility to ensure that the project that I'm trying to deliver is successful. I can use XenApp to mitigate the browser dependencies that I have, so I no longer have to rely on specific browsers to work and different plugins and other bits and pieces. I can give a seamless user experience out to my end users. I can deliver applications from anywhere into my Windows 10 desktop, and I can seamlessly switch in and switch out the underlying OS. And I can also virtualize my desktop as well, which will help me keep up with the CVB releases in the coming future, or even stay on the current release if I so choose to. And after I've undertaken all those compatibility problems and I'm now on Windows 10, I've actually caught Wile E. Coyote's had some success and he's caught the Roadrunner. So it's a great outcome for all.
So just before you guys go, we obviously have got some time left, so we're happy to take some Q&A. I think we've got 15 minutes scheduled for that, so there's more than enough time, hopefully, to answer all your questions. Obviously, if you want to do some continuous learning at Ignite, you can obviously go to the Microsoft, all the training and the event videos, the Tech Ed Eval Center, they can download some of the evaluation stuff, and obviously the Virtual Academy. Citrix is actually having a giveaway. So the Death Star, which is, I think, amazing. I wish I could win it. It's a special edition. We have to buy it from the US and import it, and there's a number of ways. You've got to do a number of things to win it. This is one of them, one of 5, and the way that you win this is you go to the Citrix booth and we can sign your entry form, and you need to provide that code, 75159. So I'll give you guys a second to take a photo of that if you want. I'm sure your kids would be extremely happy with you to bring that home.
Don't tweet it because it gives you more chance to win it.
Yeah, you don't want to share that one if you can. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for your time today. And again, if you want to talk to me or Aaron or anyone else at Citrix, there's obviously a lot of stuff that we're doing with Microsoft that's quite exciting. Come have a chat to us at the booth. It's number 13 right next to the Microsoft booth. So with that, I just want to ask any questions. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Sorry, over to you.
What version of XenDesktop is unity-based app player?
Well, there's basically, if you've got any version of XenApp or XenDesktop, you get the image creation layering stuff with that. For the guest layering or the dynamic layering, that's with Platinum. Yeah, so what you should see is, I've been told, end of March, you'll start seeing your licenses appearing in the license portal for that. But any other questions? Yep. Yes, it is an on-premise deployment. It's not a cloud service, and that's again available if you've got XenApp or XenDesktop Platinum, or if you engage a partner that's a Citrix solution provider, they have access to that as a service normally. Yeah.
We also have AppDNA Express, which is available only for Windows 10 out of the cloud.
Yeah.
With the Unidesk,
Yeah.
how many user profiles, user layers can you get?
Well, it's the impact is for the I suppose once you hit that threshold per user, it's searching through it, but the layering is actually restricted to the hypervisor. So I think there's per hypervisor there's 65,000 layers that it can handle or something like that. So I don't think you're going to hit that. Hopefully not. But yeah, the impact will be more on how many layers are going to be applied to each user and having to search those different layers.
Yeah.
And can those layers interact with each other, like the application?
Yeah. So it's kind of like if you had multiple snapshots, or they all can see each other essentially.
Yeah. So it's not like AppV where it
Isolates them.
Yeah,
it looks
they can all
transparent
see.
to the end user.
We use VMware Thinner. Do you know about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Will AppDNA work with that? Will
No.
that support that?
No, because that's a compiled executable into and ThinApp is good because it's kind of, you don't need an agent or anything like that with it, but it's just got its downside because the only way you can use it is by clicking on the exe.
For SAP, different Chrome
Yeah.
and that.
Yeah.
We're putting that on our service
Yeah.
for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, we can't. We need the original source files in
Okay.
that you had when you created that
Also,
thinner package.
HTML5.
Yep.
I know it's the kiosk mode. Is it? Is it what it's for, or it's like?
Well,
Is